find a good level here. Maybe that's okay? Hello. I don't know what a good level is for this music. I definitely don't want it very loud. Make this a little weaker. Yes, Moocher, you made it for story time! I'm so glad you're here. Is this level okay? Working on this level in here. I definitely want to be louder than the music, but I don't want the music to be distracting. So y'all just shout at me as to how the music's sounding. Hello, happy Wednesday. I was expected to not be home at all today and ended up home, which is great news for me, because it means I get to do some more chores, which I've been falling far behind. Levels are good? Cool. I've been falling behind on my chores, and I was slightly stressed out this week, and so you want the music to be a little bit lower? I can do that. How's that? Is that a little better? So I wasn't expecting to be home this afternoon. I am home this afternoon. Since I'm so stressed out this week, I thought that I would do a little bit of streaming because it's fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you. But anyway, that's the deal. So, sorry that you missed the first 5 chapters, Moocher. But thank you both for being here, number one. I appreciate that. I know it's an unplanned stream, awkward time of the day. Everybody's going to be at school or work or whatever. So, for all of you people who may be ketchuping, thank you for ketchuping. That sing talking? Oh. I'm vocally trying. That's a joke that hasn't been told in a long time. Where's Ange when you need her? So I don't know if it's the weather change. It feels wonderful outside, and I've been waiting for this coolish, this chilly weather for a while. But because of that, I am kind of dry-throated. So I have a big cup of beverage here. Forgive me if I have to pause in the middle of a chapter to take a sip. Without further ado, I think I'm going to go ahead and jump right into chapter 6. And again, thank you both for being here. Okay. That was gross, I'm sorry. I'm gross. Okay. Chapter 6. The Ghost in the Mirror. "Hurry!" Bess cried. She ran from the parlor doorway to the back stairs. Nancy and George exchanged worried looks, then took off after Bess, followed by the others. Nancy found her way down the dark stairs to the saloon. Bess pointed wildly at the huge mirror behind the bar. There, in the mirror, I saw Lizzie. By now the others were in the saloon too. "I'm sure it was just your imagination, dear," Rose said kindly. "You've been staring at those photographs for hours," Abby added. "Your mind's playing tricks." "No, I saw Lizzie," Bess insisted. "Tell us exactly what you saw," Nancy said. She knew her friend had an active imagination, but Bess would never just make up a story. If Bess said she saw something, Nancy believed her. "The ghost had blonde hair and curls, and she was wearing men's clothing," Bess told Nancy. "I only saw her for a second, but I know that's what I saw." "Perhaps you simply saw your own reflection," Lewis suggested. "You have blonde hair." "Why, yes," Hannah added, "and you're wearing jeans. That would make your reflection look like it was wearing men's clothing." Bess shook her head, her mouth drawn in a tight line. I saw Lizzie. It was obvious to Nancy that Bess was upset. Just as on the night before, when the sink flooded, she felt frustrated that people didn't believe her. Nancy wrapped an arm around her friend, and George stood close beside her. Don't worry, we'll find out what you saw, Nancy said. Bess sighed. Thanks, Nan. She walked over to the piano and grabbed the songbook. Might as well get what I came for, she muttered. Everyone filed upstairs. Back in the parlor, Bess and Abby looked through the songbook. Too bad, Abby said, shaking her head. Lizzie's song isn't here. Louis soon said goodnight and left. Hannah, Abby, and the girls decided it was time to go to bed. I'll just stay up and finish hemming this curtain, said Rose, still at her sewing machine. I'll keep an eye on the fire to make sure it's out before I come up. The next afternoon, Nancy sat in the periodicals room of the San Francisco Public Library. Pressing her forehead against the viewer on a microfilm projector, Nancy watched a series of old insurance maps whiz by on the film strip. The maps, the librarian had called them Sanborn maps, showed each building on every lot in old San Francisco. With a crank on the side of the projector, she turned the microfilm reel to zero in on the map that included the block of California Street where the mansion stood. Neatly lettered on the map at the mansion site was the Golden Gardenia Hotel. So Rose and Abby's house was the same hotel as shown as the old playbills. Nancy smiled triumphantly. This historical research was fun. Next, Nancy moved over to a shelf of old telephone directories, thick volumes bound in maroon leather. She took down the directory for 1894 and looked up the Golden Gardenia Hotel. Running her finger down a column, she found its address on California Street, the same address as Rose and Abby's house. Then she flipped through the pages until she found a listing for E. Valdez. Sorry, hang on one second. Okay. It was the same address. But who was E. Valdez? Nancy mused. Abby had told them that the 1894 block book showed that same name as the owner of the lot where Rose and Abby's house stood. Just to make sure, Nancy had double-checked the block book this afternoon. It had said E. Valdez all right. E. Valdez. Could the E stand for Elizabeth, someone who might be nicknamed Lizzie? But why not Applegate? Why Valdez? Nancy went back down to the hall, to the history room, where she had left Bess poring over old journals. I found out all sorts of stuff about Lizzie Applegate, Bess whispered eagerly. Good, Nancy said, checking her watch. I found out some interesting stuff too, but we're supposed to meet Hannah, Emily, and George at the Grand Hotel at 4:30, and it's 4:15 now. We can fill each other in over tea. Outside, Nancy and Bess wrapped their coats tightly around them and headed for New Montgomery Street. George was waiting on the steps of the Grand Hotel. Did you find the water department all right? Nancy asked her. George's research task today had been to go up to the water department on Mason Street to look up the original application for water at the mansion's site. George nodded. Mission accomplished. Nancy! Girls! Nancy turned to see Hannah and Emily Foxworth hurrying up the sidewalk toward the hotel. Emily looked just as Nancy remembered her, a trim, energetic older woman with several cameras slung over her shoulder. Emily wore dark slacks, walking shoes, a close-fitting jacket, and a small-brimmed hat. Chattering merrily, the party entered the elegant old hotel. Emily led them to the Queen's Court, an enormous glass-domed room full of crystal chandeliers, potted palms, and marble columns. A waiter in a brocade vest led them to a low table surrounded by upholstered chairs and a small couch. Nancy ordered chamomile tea, Bess and George black currant tea, and Emily and Hannah Earl Grey tea. They also asked the waiter to bring them some sandwiches and pastries. The girls exchanged news with Emily. Working on the restoration of that house must be fascinating, said Emily. Well, it certainly makes my muscles ache, Bess declared, rubbing her shoulder ruefully. I was hanging wallpaper all day yesterday and all this morning. I've got glue caked all around my fingernails. Yuck. The others chuckled. Then Nancy explained to Emily about their research project. She told the others what she had learned that day from the block books, the insurance maps, and the telephone directory. The waiter brought their order, and everyone hungrily attacked the platter of food. So tell us, George, Nancy said, did you find the water application? George nodded. Everything I found out supports what you learned, she reported. The first application for water at the site was for the Golden Gardenia, a hotel. The application was dated 1888 and it was signed by E. Valdez. A later application dated 1906 was signed by Rachel Armstrong. It listed the building as a private residence. Nancy nodded. Rose said that the Armstrong sisters owned that house for years. Nancy, let me tell you what I found out, Bess said, reaching for a cucumber sandwich. Remember how Lizzie Applegate was an entertainer in the California gold mining camps and then a famous bandit, El Diablo, fell in love with her? El Diablo, said Emily. In Spanish, that would mean the devil. Bess tossed her head. He may have been a little devilish, but he was definitely romantic. She sighed. At the end of each of Lizzie's performances, he would ride a beautiful black horse up to the stage and leave her flowers. Then he would ride away before anyone could catch him, and get this, he usually left her gardenias. Wow! So if the hotel belonged to her, that would explain the name the Golden Gardenia, Nancy said. Bess went on breathlessly. Each time he came, the bandit would appear suddenly and then disappear. One day, Lizzie and the bandit rode away together on his beautiful horse. Excited, Bess leaned forward, her uneaten sandwich in her hand. People thought Lizzie had joined the bandits' gang. Then, on Christmas Day in 1878, there was a big stagecoach robbery. The bandit? Nancy asked. Bess nodded, her eyes glowing. Right after that, the bandit and his gang were ambushed, but the bandit escaped and a woman with long blonde curls was seen riding away with him. Lizzie? Hannah asked with a smile. It has to be, said Bess. Anyway, Lizzie came to San Francisco right after that and began acting in melodramas at the Bella Union Theater. She became a famous actress. That's when she wrote The Bandit's Treasure. And then she opened a big hotel, but this hotel burned down only a year later, she finished, biting mournfully into her sandwich. The history books must have it wrong. The Golden Gardenia didn't burn down, Hannah said. At least it was still there this morning. Everyone laughed. Wait, I'm confused, said Emily, looking over the rim of her teacup. All the records show that the hotel on California Street, the Golden Gardenia, right, was owned by an E. Valdez, so why do you think it's Lizzie Applegate's hotel? That's part of what we're trying to figure out, Nancy explained. The playbills we found said that Lizzie's play, The Bandit's Treasure, was being performed at the Golden Gardenia, and the pictures we found showed a woman who looked just like Lizzie posing with her staff on the staircase of Rose and Abby's house. I just know the Golden Gardenia was Lizzie's hotel, Bess insisted. Did you ever find out El Diablo's real name? Emily asked. No, Bess admitted. But Valdez is a Spanish name, isn't it? And El Diablo is Spanish. I think we're all thinking the same thing, Nancy said. Maybe E. Valdez was Lizzie's married name, after she married the bandit. Why don't you girls visit the California Express Company Museum? Emily said. I did some research there when I was illustrating an article on treasure hunters. I'll bet the bandit robbed some of their stagecoaches. Maybe the museum historians would know his real name. That might answer the Valdez question. Good idea, Nancy said. Thanks, Emily. Bess suddenly dug into her purse. Speaking of questions, she said to Emily, I have one for you. She showed Emily the photograph she'd taken of Rose, Abby, Hannah, Nancy, and George their first night in San Francisco. Pointing out the white mist overhead, she asked, Could that be a ghost? Emily laughed. You have quite an imagination, Bess, she said. More likely it's a distortion from reflected light, or even a blemish on the film. Disappointed, Bess put the photograph away. After they finished their tea, Hannah and Emily left to do some window shopping before going to a play that night. The girls caught a bus back to the mansion. I hope Rose and Abby found some good bargains at that estate sale this afternoon, George said as they walked back to the mansion from the bus stop. Rose said that all the furnishings of one big house were being sold after the owner died. I guess Rose and Abby still need a lot of furniture for all the guest rooms. Yes, and they want all the antiques to make the house look really authentic, Bess added. At least Rose does. But I heard Abby this morning telling Rose they couldn't afford so many antiques and they should just buy new stuff. I think that would be such a shame. Nancy glanced ahead toward the house. As she looked, a figure came racing down the sidewalk toward them. Nancy realized it was the same blonde teenager she'd seen before, the one who had waved through the restaurant window at Mary Lee. As he came closer, Nancy saw that he was holding a large bundle under his ragged army coat. His face was pale and his eyes were wild with panic. Hey! Nancy yelled as he charged at them. But the boy didn't stop. He darted around the girls and ran on down the street. What in the... Bess began. But she didn't get a chance to finish. Nancy grabbed Bess's arm, pointing with her other hand toward Rose and Abby's house. A trail of black smoke was pouring out of one of the windows in the front parlor. Okay, that's the end of 6. Oh, hi, Corvid. story time. You get it? I'm so funny. Besties and ghost friends be like, you dress like a man. Oh no, I don't have my bot on. I'm sorry. I keep not having my bot on. I'm a terrible streamer. You like the music background or the music's tempo? Oh yeah, yeah. I just like playing the Nancy Drew music while I'm reading Nancy Drew. No, you are a great mod. I'm a terrible streamer. Thanks for lurking, Corvid. I like this music. Hi, Summer. Feels like workout music. It's most likely a ghost in that. So hello. How's everybody doing? That came in late. All right. Okay. All right. Moving on. Chapter 7. Evidence in the ashes. The mansion's on fire! Nancy shouted. The girls raced down the sidewalk. They heard sirens wailing in the distance, and just as they reached the burning building, 2 fire trucks roared up. Jumping off the truck, the firefighters... I'll get back to you. The firefighters grabbed their hoses and headed for the house. Just then, the girls saw Lewis Chandler come rushing out the front door with a fire extinguisher. Anyone else inside? A firefighter stopped to ask Lewis. No, no one's home. Lewis panted, his face and clothes covered with soot. I tried to put out the fire, but I couldn't. Suddenly, Abby appeared at the front door in her bathrobe, clutching her cat Alfreda in her arms. She looked around helplessly, her face a mixture of fright and confusion. Nancy ran up the steps to help guide Abby down to the sidewalk. A firefighter yelled to the crew to check the house for other occupants. Lewis stared at Abby in surprise. Abby, I thought you and Rose went to the estate sale. I felt sick, so I stayed home, Abby said, her voice quavering. I just woke up and I heard the sirens. What is going on? Lewis mopped his brow. A fire? Abby looked stunned. Oh no, she whispered. But how? Her voice trailed off as she looked up at the mansion in dismay. Thank goodness you woke up, Bess said. Lewis didn't know you were here when he tried to put the fire out. Abby turned to Lewis. You were here? I was walking past the house, Lewis said, when I smelled smoke. The door was unlocked and I ran in and I tried to put out the fire. The front door was unlocked? Abby repeated, dazed. Nancy frowned, wondering the same thing. Where's Charlie? Lewis asked. He left at about 4, Abby said. He went to the lumberyard to buy roofing supplies so he could repair the tower roof. A crowd had begun to gather across the street. Nancy scanned the faces, but she didn't see the blonde boy. He'd been coming from the direction of the fire when she saw him. Who is she? Who is he? She wondered, frowning. And what does he know about the fire? The firefighters quickly extinguished the blaze. A firefighter in a white helmet came out the door and introduced himself to Lewis, Abby, and the girls as Chief Martinez. Any idea how the fire started? Lewis asked. Chief Martinez rubbed his jaw. We're investigating that right now, but that fire in the fireplace might be the source. You've got no fire screen. People have no business starting a fire without a protective screen. Abby grew pale and held Alfreda close. Rose told me not to, she said in a shaky voice. But I was cold and I was watching the fire. I really was. And then about 4:30 I felt sick to my stomach, so I put it out and I went upstairs to read in bed. I was sure I put it out. Nancy watched Abby closely. She certainly seemed to be telling the truth. Chief Martinez spoke sternly. You need a screen, ma'am. A fire can look like it's out, but one spark can make it flare up again, and these old houses can go up in minutes. Fortunately, this fire didn't do much damage, thanks to your friend here. He got here just in time. It looks like you had a lot of paper spread out on the carpet, though, and that went up like tinder. Abby's lower lip twitched. She looked close to tears. "Those historical documents," she groaned. Nancy, George, and Bess looked at each other in dismay. The fire chief turned to Lewis. "Next time, sir, please don't try to put out the fire by yourself," he said. "You could have been injured. You were the one who called the fire department." Lewis shook his head. "No." The chief shrugged. "Well, somebody did. Maybe one of your neighbors saw the smoke." Abby was still staring dully at the house. "Another accident," she murmured. Nancy's eyes traveled from Abby's stricken face to the mansion. She had the uneasy feeling that the fire was not just another accident. Chief Martinez left to confer with his squad. Then a police car pulled up and a plainclothes detective stepped out. Nancy's eyes lit up. "Lieutenant Chin," she called. Nancy and George had met Lieutenant Donald Chin while working on Emily Foxworth's case. They ran over to him. "Nancy Drew and George too." Lieutenant Chin looked surprised. "What are you doing here?" "We were helping out some friends renovate this house," Nancy told him. "A fire broke out in the parlor while we were gone this afternoon." Chin nodded. "I heard the sirens and decided to stop by." Nancy glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "Lieutenant, maybe you should know there have been a series of accidents in this house lately," she told him quietly. "You're suggesting this fire is deliberate?" the lieutenant asked with an attentive glance. Nancy hesitated. "I don't have any evidence. Yet." He nodded. "I'll take a look around inside," he said, "and if you find something or if I can help in any way, just call me." Nancy accepted the card Lieutenant Chin pulled from his pocket and shook his hand. "As soon as I have evidence, I will call you." "Do that, and please give my best to Emily when you see her." He excused himself and went to talk with Chief Martinez. The firefighters cleaned up their equipment and piled back into the trucks. Abby, Lewis, and the girls were given the all-clear to go back inside. As Lieutenant Chin came back outside, he threw Nancy a baffled look that told her he'd found no evidence. Abby headed straight for the parlor to survey the damage, with Lewis and the girls close behind. The carpet in front of the fireplace was drenched with water from the fire hoses. The wallpaper on the fireplace wall was black with smoke, but the rest of the furnishings had not burned. The historical documents, though, were now a mass of wet black ashes. "At least I have the manuscript for the bandit's treasure," Abby said sadly. "I took that upstairs to read." "And the photos didn't burn," Bess added, moving into the back parlor to examine the old photographs she'd laid out on the table there. Abby looked at Lewis gratefully. "I'd hate to think what might have happened if you hadn't gotten here," she said. From the window, Nancy saw Charlie drive up, the bed of his truck loaded with building supplies. She went outside to meet him. As she told him about the fire, she watched his reaction carefully. "What?" Charlie croaked. The wrinkles around his eyes deepened as he scrutinized the house. "How much damage?" he asked wearily. "Mostly some historical papers we were looking at last night," Nancy said, "and the wallpaper and carpeting by the fireplace." Charlie shook his head. "I wasn't gone very long," he said in a dull, desperate tone of voice. "When will it end?" He limped slowly back to his truck to unload the supplies. Nancy bit her lip. Her instincts told her that he'd known nothing about the fire, but how could she be sure? An idea hit her. "Could I help you unload that stuff?" she offered. Charlie looked surprised. Okay, thanks." Nancy hurried to his pickup truck and reached for a sack. When Charlie turned away, she peeked in the bag, saw a sales slip, and pulled it out. At the top of the sales slip was printed a store's address out in Oakland, about an hour's drive away, and the time of the sale was printed on the slip, 5:13 p.m. Abby had said she was still in the parlor at 4:30. Charlie would have had to leave the house well before then to be at the store and make his purchase at 5:13. He couldn't have started the fire. Nancy helped him carry his supplies inside and then returned to the front parlor. Only George and Bess were there, scooping up the wet, charred paper and dumping it into a large trash can. "Be careful," Nancy said as she knelt down to help them. "We need to save the paper. If this is a case of arson, the police will need evidence." Nancy tugged gently at a sodden clump of black paper. Reaching for a loose piece, she stopped suddenly and stared at the paper's top right corner. The corner had escaped the flames somehow, and some handwriting was still visible on it. It had a date, 1982. Nancy stared in disbelief. All the papers they'd been looking at the night before were dated from the 1800s. Lewis entered the parlor and noticed Nancy staring at the paper. "What is it?" he asked. Nancy looked up quickly. "Oh, nothing," she said, shrugging. But as she bent back to her cleanup work, she slipped the scrap of paper into her skirt pocket. Louis and George moved the furniture into the second parlor, and Nancy and Bess started to roll up the wet, burned carpet. They heard a car pull up outside, and a minute later, Rose burst through the door of the parlor. She gasped, then stood frozen, staring at the blackened fireplace wall. Louis put his arm sympathetically around Rose's tiny figure and led her out to the kitchen. "At least we have fire insurance," Nancy heard Rose telling Louis in a brave but shaky voice. "Abby insisted on that." "Poor Rose," Bess murmured. "I don't know how much more she could take." Nancy nodded grimly, but she thought to herself, why had Abby insisted on fire insurance? A half hour later, the cleanup was more or less finished. Abby, saying she wasn't feeling well, went to bed early. Louis took Rose out to dinner. The girls decided to go back to the Chinese restaurant. When they walked in, they saw Mary Lee sitting with a large family group around one of the big round tables. She waved and jumped up. "We saw fire trucks," she said anxiously. "Is everything all right?" "We had a scare," Nancy admitted, "but fortunately the fire damage was minor." "Thank goodness," Mary said. "Come on and join our family. It's a slow night, so we're eating together." Mary helped them pull up chairs and introduced them to her family. Her father and mother, her grandmother and grandfather, her Uncle Ray and Aunt June, her brother Sam, and her cousins Winston and Lorraine. Mary explained to the Lees that the girls were helping to restore the Victorian mansion down the street. Mary's grandfather looked excited. "My father worked there when it was a hotel," he said. "He was the cook." The girls exchanged glances. Maybe Mary's grandfather could tell them more about Lizzie. "When was that?" Nancy asked. "Up until 1906, the year of the earthquake," the grandfather answered. "When the owner died, the hotel closed. Then my father opened a restaurant in Chinatown. That's still there. My son Ray's the manager." He pointed to Mary's uncle. "We opened the second restaurant here 2 years ago." Nancy knit her eyebrows. "Mr. Lee," she said, "we found a photograph of a Chinese man standing with a woman who we think was the owner of the hotel. Maybe that man's your father?" Bess's eyes perked up, eyes sparkling. "Hang on, I'll go get it." She dashed from the restaurant. When Bess returned minutes later, Mary's grandfather examined the old photograph carefully. He broke into a smile. "Yes, this is my father," he said, "and I recognize this woman from my father's photographs. She was the hotel's owner." Mr. Lee passed the photo around the table. Nancy's heart beat hard with excitement. "Do you know the name of the hotel's owner?" she asked. "Lizzie," Mr. Lee answered at once. "And her last name?" Nancy prodded. "I never knew her last name," Mr. Lee said. "My father only ever called her Lizzie." It was quite late when the party broke up. Nancy, George, and Bess thanked Mary and her parents, then Mary walked the girls to the door. At the door, Nancy turned to Mary. "There's something I need to ask you," she said. "I saw a guy with blonde hair running down the street today just before the fire trucks arrived. I've seen him before outside your restaurant and in the neighborhood. Who is he? Do you know him?" Mary looked over her shoulder, avoiding Nancy's eyes. "Oh, well," Mary mumbled. Just then the door to the restaurant opened and a young couple entered. Looking relieved, Mary excused herself to show the couple to a table. Outside, Nancy wondered at Mary's strange response. She was sure now that Mary knew the boy, but why didn't she want to admit that to Nancy? The girls hurried through the cold night air back to the mansion. Inside, the smell of smoke was still strong. They tiptoed upstairs. "It's freezing," Bess said. "I can't wait to get into bed." "Good luck trying to fall asleep," George said. "This smoky smell is giving me a headache." Nancy turned from the bureau and paused to smell the air. The smoky smell was certainly there, but there seemed to be something else. "What is it, Nan?" George asked. Nancy shook her head. "I guess it's nothing." She reached into the headboard, pulling back the quilt. Then she gave a start. Bess and George ran over. "What?" Bess cried. Nancy pointed to the pillow. Lying on the white pillowcase was a small piece of notebook paper. A single line was typed across it. "Leave the mansion at once." That's the end of chapter 7. I'm going to restart this playlist. It's like playing the same 6 songs over and over and over. We've heard this song and that Dossier song a bunch of times. And then I will catch up on chat. Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Moocher, for that resub. That was just super sweet of you. Thank you so much for that. Chef Martinez. Yeah, I don't know why I said chef. My favorite Dutch person, Timon, has arrived. Hello, good morning, Gojira. I'm pretty sure you're somebody else, but I haven't figured it out. It's nothing, Luce. Go find your own trash. I'm good as well. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. This is not a game. This is a book. There's something I need to do. Why are you always quite contrary? Hope you guys are enjoying. Yeah, I know. But you do the announcement on your own, so thank you for announcing the resub so that I could give you proper thanks, proper credit. Alright, let me take one more sip and then we'll go into Chapter 8. Chapter 8, A Fragrant Message. Bess gasped. Leave the mansion? Why? Who could be threatening us? Nancy picked up the note. Her nose wrinkled as she sniffed the note paper. That's what I was smelling, she said. This paper. George sniffed the paper. Some kind of flowery perfume, she said, making a disgusted face. Bess leaned over to take a whiff, and Nancy took another one. Then they looked up at each other. Gardenia, they said at the same time. Gardenia, George said. Nancy nodded. They have a very distinct fragrance, she said. And gardenias are the kinds of flowers El Diablo brought Lizzie, Bess said excitedly. Maybe this note is from Lizzie, from Lizzie's ghost. There are no ghosts, Bess, George declared. Bess plopped on the bed. Then who left the note? Whoever started the fire, Nancy guessed. George eyed Nancy carefully. You think the fire was just another fake accident? Yes, Nancy answered. She pulled the half-burned scrap of paper from her pocket. I found this in the mess of the parlor. George studied the paper. 1982? Bess looked confused. But the papers in the desk all dated from the 1800s. This date has to be wrong. Exactly, Nancy said. Maybe another letter got mixed up with the old papers, Bess suggested. Rose said she'd been going through her correspondence, remember? Maybe one of her old letters accidentally fell into the pile of historical stuff. That's good thinking, Nancy said. We'll ask Rose if any of her letters are missing. But if this is one of Rose's letters, maybe it wasn't so accidental. Just think, how do we know it was the historical documents that got burned? All we could see was a bunch of charred paper. I don't get this, George said. We left the papers in front of the fireplace. If they didn't burn, where are they? Exactly, Nancy said. I think somebody may have stolen Lizzie's papers, and to cover up the theft, the thief put other papers, such as Rose's letters, in their place. Then he or she burned the substitute letters so we'd think the real ones were lost in the fire. Bess jumped up from the bed. There is a secret in Lizzie's papers. I knew it. That's why someone stole them. Do you think the same person who stole the letters, started the fire, caused the other accidents too? George asked. Nancy nodded. Someone wants to learn Lizzie's secret. And I bet that same person is trying to keep the mansion from opening as a hotel, but I don't know why, she added almost to herself. Who are your suspects? Bess asked. Nancy frowned. Abby was home when the fire started, she pointed out. Abby wouldn't vandalize her own property, Bess protested. Besides, she was sleeping upstairs. She said she was sleeping, George corrected Bess. Maybe Abby thinks there's a clue to the house's secret in Lizzie's papers and she wants to keep that to herself? Nancy looked thoughtful. I heard Rose tell Lewis that Abby insisted on fire insurance, she recalled. Maybe Abby wants out of this bed and breakfast business, but Rose won't quit. So Abby starts a fire, the mansion burns, and she files an insurance claim, and Abby gets out of the hotel project without losing any money. But besides Abby, who are your suspects? Bess asked Nancy, eager to know more. Charlie does have an alibi, Nancy said. He was at the building supply store. I saw a sales slip in one of his bags that definitely proves he couldn't have been here when the fire was started. But of course that doesn't clear him of the other incidents. Anyone else? George asked. Well, there's that blonde kid we saw running down the street before the fire, Nancy answered. Who is he, and why is he always hanging around here? Mary was awfully evasive when I asked her about him. I think she's hiding something. But how could the kid have gotten inside to start the fire? George pointed out. Lewis said he found the door unlocked, Nancy reminded her. What about the note, Nancy? Bess asked. Who could have left that? Abby and Charlie were both here when we left tonight, Nancy noted, and who knows, maybe that blonde boy sneaked into the house somehow. Bess sighed. Almost everybody's a suspect, she said. Where can we start? First thing tomorrow, we ask Rose if any of her letters are missing, Nancy said. If they are, that might mean someone made a switch. And then, said George. Then we search for Lizzie's papers, Nancy replied, and the first place I'd like to search is Abby's room. The next morning, Hannah hurried downstairs to the kitchen. Hannah was there dressed for work in jeans and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a bandana. She was reading the newspaper and eating a bowl of oatmeal. Morning, Hannah. Where's Rose? Nancy asked. Rose and Lewis went to an auction early this morning, Hannah said. They're hoping to find a chandelier for the entry. Nancy sat at the kitchen table. What happened to the drawer? She asked, pointing to a drawer of utensils sitting on the table. It's broken, Hannah said, putting down the paper. I tried to fix it myself, but I couldn't. Maybe Charlie could look at it today. Nancy put some English muffins in the toaster and poured herself some juice. Soon George and Bess ambled into the kitchen. You guys are up early, Hannah commented. I thought we'd get an early start so we could visit the California Express Company this afternoon like Emily suggested, Bess explained, reaching for the coffee pot. What's the work schedule for today? You and I are stripping wallpaper again, Hannah sighed and got up from the table. Not more wallpaper, Bess groaned. Would you rather be outside chipping paint with Nancy and me? George teased. No thanks, Bess said hastily. Is Abby up yet, Hannah? Nancy asked. No, she says she's still sick, Hannah said. She asked me to call her if she didn't come down by 1 o'clock. The insurance agent's coming this afternoon to make an inspection of the fire scene. I hope nothing serious is wrong with Abby, she added, looking concerned. Nancy nodded and murmured sympathetically. She too hoped Abby wasn't seriously ill, but on the other hand, she was impatient to check Abby's room. And if Abby wasn't sick, Nancy thought, she was acting awfully strange. I never knew stagecoaches were so huge, Bess exclaimed, eyeing an old coach. George read the sign beside the coach. This says as many as 18 people traveled on a stagecoach. 9 inside and 9 on top, she said. Nancy smiled. So the coach probably didn't seem so big after all, she remarked. The girls stood in the lobby of the California Express Company Museum, looking at the displays while waiting for a historian to help them. Bess peered into a case displaying tiny mounds of gold dust from different regions. This is real gold. Isn't it beautiful? Nancy Drew. A young woman in her mid-20s appeared behind them. She introduced herself as Lisa Morley, one of the staff historians. The receptionist told me you were interested in doing some research, she said. Yes, Nancy said. We're particularly interested in a stagecoach robber who went by the name of El Diablo. We have lots of information on El Diablo, Lisa said, leading the girls up a flight of stairs. Is there anything in particular you're looking for? Do you know his real name? Asked Nancy eagerly. Why, yes, Diego Valdez, Lisa responded. The girls broke into smiles. Were Diego and Lizzie Applegate married? Bess asked as they walked into a research office upstairs. Was Lizzie also Elizabeth Valdez? I've never seen proof of their marriage, Lisa answered, but it wouldn't surprise me. They were certainly in love with each other. Did Lizzie's hotel burn down? George asked. Her first hotel on Ellis Street burned, Lisa said. Her first one? Then there was more than one? Nancy asked. Oh, yes, Lisa said. She perched on the edge of a table, clearly enjoying her subject. After she retired from the theater, Lizzie opened a magnificent hotel downtown. That was the one that burned, and unfortunately for history, most of her papers burned up then too. Several years later, though, she opened another hotel farther out. Where was it? Nancy pumped her. Lisa shrugged. We don't know, she admitted. The address under which it was originally registered happened to be wrong. Those things happen. But that mistake has made it hard to trace the real building. And Lizzie's fame was fading by then, so the second hotel wasn't as well known as the first. What was the second hotel's name? Bess asked. It was called the Golden Gardenia, Lisa said, just as the first hotel was. Nancy drew in a deep breath. We believe we're staying in Lizzie's second hotel, she told Lisa. It's a rundown Victorian that we're helping to renovate on California Street. She proceeded to tell Lisa about their discoveries. Lisa was excited to hear about the old papers they'd found, but dismayed to hear about the fire. Nancy thought it best not to raise the historian's hopes with the idea that the historical papers might still exist. But these didn't burn, Bess said, pulling out the old photos they'd found. She showed Lisa the picture of the blonde woman in men's clothing. Did Lizzie ever dress like a man? Bess asked. She did, Lisa said, smiling at the photo. I imagine Lizzie liked the freedom men's clothing gave her. Even out west, women had a restricted life during the 1800s. A man could go anywhere and do almost anything, and a woman couldn't. The girls bombarded the historian with questions as they flipped through the photos. Lizzie had a diverse life, Lisa told them. For example, as she grew older, she was famous for holding seances. Most people thought the seances were just a publicity stunt, but others thought she was trying to contact El Diablo. Then he was dead, Nancy asked. We can't be sure, Lisa said, but he was never seen after his last robbery on Christmas Day in 1878. He and his gang robbed a stagecoach of a big shipment of gold, but they were ambushed by a posse of detectives soon after that robbery. The detectives wounded El Diablo, but they didn't kill him. He disappeared with that gold. How romantic, Bess sighed. Some said he escaped to Mexico with the gold, Lisa went on. Others said he left the money with Lizzie. Maybe he came back and got it, and maybe he didn't. It was $60,000 in 1878 gold coins. With that much money at stake, there were bound to be a lot of wild stories. Nancy nodded. I can imagine. After thanking Lisa for her help, the girls left the museum and took a bus back to the mansion, talking excitedly about what they had learned. Back at the house, Nancy slid her key in the warped front door and pushed hard. She saw at once a spectacular chandelier hanging in the entry. 100 crystal pendants showered the entry hall with a sparkling light. Rose and Lewis found that chandelier they were looking for, Nancy said, awed. It's beautiful, Bess agreed, stepping inside behind Nancy. The last to come in, George turned to slam shut the warped door. Then she too looked up. The crystal chandelier seemed to dance through the air. Then, as if on cue, the huge ornate lighting fixture came crashing to the floor. You have nothing to do while flying? Ruh-roh, Twix is chewing on something she shouldn't be. Uh-oh. Ghost started the fire. Oh, I didn't stop the music, I just restarted it. Hi, Angela! He got shot but successfully stopped him. Hey, Brandon! Great to see you guys. Am I being annoying? Sorry, I'm loud. My sister just came and closed my door with this look on her face. Thanks for stopping by. Have a great day. Sames. Angela, I have missed you. Did Timon tell you to come here? Because I feel like he might have. I love Nancy Drew music. Anyway, only 2 more chapters before I stop stream. I think I might come back and start, and I might break for after I do 2 more chapters, I might break for 10 minutes, set up a Shattered Medallion stream, and then start that. I'm just kind of feeling it, you know what I'm saying? Yay! No, yeah, he was here. I thought he was still here. Timon, are you still here? But that's a coinky dink. Yeah, he was here earlier. I'm glad you're here, though. Alright, 2 more chapters. Let's go. Chapter 9. Time is running out. Nancy grabbed Bess's arm, pulling her out of the way. Ah! Bess's cry rang out as the broken chandelier fell with a crash on the entry hall floor. Nancy heard a gasp and saw the mirrored door to the parlor open. Abby stood in the doorway looking at the chandelier remnants in astonishment. I saw what happened, she said shakily, through the two-way mirror. George, are you okay? Nancy asked. George nodded, checking her pant legs. I don't think any of the pieces hit me. I can still go running with Mary later. Rose and Hannah rushed in from the back hall, followed by Charlie, a screwdriver in his hand. They all stopped and stared wide-eyed at the fallen chandelier. Rose opened her mouth to speak, but Abby cut her off. How can we open the hotel? She burst out almost hysterically. Rose, don't you see? We just hung that chandelier and now it crashes down. These accidents don't stop. This house is cursed. Nancy stepped gingerly over the pile of crystal shards, bending over to survey the debris. Amidst the shattered glass, she spied a broken link from the chandelier's brass chain. She quickly pocketed it. As Nancy looked up, Rose was gazing at the broken glass, tears brimming in her eyes. But as Rose turned to Abby, her voice was firm. I will not give up, Abby, she said. Now help me get this mess cleaned up. Within a few minutes, they had swept the floor and scooped all the jagged pieces into a box. Charlie carted it off to the garbage. Upstairs in the blue room, Nancy showed her friends the broken chain link. Someone filed through this brass plating on the link, all the way down to the steel core, Nancy said. When you slammed the front door, George, the vibrations probably started the chandelier swinging and the chain snapped. If the chain link was filed, then the chandelier breaking was not an accident, George said, fingering the piece of brass. Nancy nodded. Someone knew that front door has to be slammed shut, she said. The chandelier must have been rigged to fall at the slightest vibration. But who would do that? Bess asked. Charlie? George suggested. He is the most likely person to have a metal file, Nancy noted. You'd need a tool like that to file through the metal chain. Abby was right there on the scene, Bess pointed out. George nodded. She seemed very upset by the crash, she remarked, but maybe that was just an act. She sure does sound ready to give up on this hotel. That could be why she's creating accidents to persuade Rose to sell. Nancy sighed, looking at the metal link. I don't know who's responsible, she said, but I just know that this is connected to the fire and all the other accidents. We have to keep on investigating before someone gets hurt. I'm going to ask Rose right now if any of her letters are missing. Nancy went to the bureau, opened the top drawer, and took out the charred piece of paper she had found after the fire. Then she went downstairs to find Rose. Rose was standing in the entry hall, gazing at the stained glass window over the front door. When she saw Nancy on the stairs, she gave a start. I'm sorry if I startled you, Rose, Nancy said, approaching her. Do you have a minute? Of course. What is it, Nancy? Rose said. You said you'd been going through your old letters. Where are they? Nancy asked. Why, they're in their old roll-top desk in the office, Rose replied, surprised. Would you show me them? Nancy asked. Rose led Nancy into her office, a small room off the entry hall. An antique roll-top desk nearly filled the tiny office. Rose lifted the lid of the desk. She paused and began fingering the stacks of papers piled there. I left them right here on top of my bills, she murmured in confusion. Nancy held out the scrap of burned paper. Does this look familiar? Rose stared at the corner of burned paper. Yes, that's my sister Margaret's handwriting. Then she gasped. Oh, Nancy, you don't think my letter's burned too? I'm sorry, Rose, but I think I do, Nancy said gently. Who knew your letters were right here? Abby does, of course. Charlie, too, I think, Rose added, thinking. And Louis knew. He dropped by one night when I was working on my Christmas cards. But, Nancy, how could my letters have burned? That fire was in the parlor. Rose began frantically opening the drawers of the desk. Maybe Abby put them away somewhere else. I'll ask her. No, Nancy said firmly. Please don't say anything to anyone, not until we know who's responsible. Rose looked pained. Well, all right, Nancy, I won't, but please find my letters. I'll try, Nancy promised, but inside she had a feeling it was already too late. After dinner that night, Rose served her special pot roast. Nancy, Bess, and George threw on their coats and strolled over to Sacramento Street, where Louis had said the vintage clothing stores were. The brightly lit shops were open late for holiday shopping. The dresses we found in the trunk should be perfect for the winter festival, Bess chattered happily. But we still need hats, shawls, gloves. Hold on, Bess, George laughed. How much were you planning to spend? Did you find El Diablo's treasure or something? Nancy smiled too and then grew thoughtful. Speaking of El Diablo's treasure, she said, let's not mention to anybody how much money the stolen gold would be worth. $60,000 in 1878 gold coins would be worth a fortune today. I don't want to get Rose's hopes up. Oh, all right, Bess agreed with a sigh. But it doesn't matter how much money it was just a cool story. Look, there's Lewis's store, George said, pointing across the street. Chandler Interiors. Should we stop in and say hello? Nancy turned to look at the shop, its front window full of old-fashioned Christmas toys. Then she did a double take. At the curb in front of Lewis's store, a green and white taxi was parked, with Charlie at the wheel. Nancy instinctively crouched behind a mailbox for cover. What is it, Nan? George asked. Nancy pointed. Look in that cab. Nancy leaned over to get a better view. Bay City Cab, she read on the side of the taxi. A young blonde woman was seated on the front seat beside Charlie, deep in a serious conversation with him. She was clearly not a paying passenger. George looked and shrugged. So, Charlie already told you he had a second job. Just then the girl got out of the cab, walked up to Lewis's store, and went inside. Nancy grabbed George's arm. Come on, guys, let's visit Lewis, Nancy said, eager to find out more. When they entered the store, they saw the blonde girl standing behind the counter. She was talking on the telephone and chewing a strand of her long hair. Trying to look casual, George and Bess stopped at a display case full of antique jewelry. Nancy spotted a beautiful armoire in the office at the rear of the shop and wandered back to look at it. That isn't a part of the store, a voice behind her called sharply. Nancy turned to see the blonde girl hurrying toward her. Nancy smiled. I just noticed the armoire, she said. That's why I came back. We're staying in the neighborhood, she added, hoping to start a conversation. We're restoring a mansion over on California Street. The girl seemed to relax. Yeah? My dad's working on a house over there, she said. His name's Charlie Weber. Do you know him? Sure, Nancy said. Now it made sense why the girl was sitting with Charlie in the front of the cab, but why was Charlie's daughter working in Lewis's store? I'm Cassandra, the girl said. Nancy shook her hand and introduced herself. Just then Lewis walked into the shop. He glanced at Bess and George in surprise, then looked around sharply. He spotted Cassandra and Nancy in the office. With a guilty gulp, Cassandra hurried back to the front counter. Nancy joined Bess and George at the jewelry case. Welcome to Chandler Interior, girls, Lewis was saying to them. See anything you like? Bess pointed at the jewelry. I love the cameos, she said, and that green brooch is really awesome. Lewis smiled. Isn't it? He said. It's emerald. A fairly common piece from the last century, but it does have certain charm. Proud of his antiques, Lewis showed the girls some fine porcelain and silver pieces, a carved desk with secret drawers, and a beautiful crystal chandelier. Did you see the chandelier Rose and I found this morning? He asked. She loved it so much I bought it on the spot. Charlie and Abby were going to clean it up and hang it. The girls exchanged nervous looks. I'm afraid there was another accident, Nancy told him. The chandelier fell from its ceiling chain. It was completely shattered. Lewis's jaw dropped. No, he cried in dismay. It can't be. Rose loved that so much, and it was such an exquisite piece. Do you have any idea why there have been so many accidents at the mansion? Nancy asked. Of course not, he declared. If I did, I would stop them at once. Then he grew thoughtful. Renovations just shouldn't be this difficult. Perhaps it's as Rose says. This house is jinxed. Nancy didn't agree, but she said nothing. The three girls thanked Lewis and made their way back to California Street. Rose was taking a cake out of the oven as they walked into the kitchen. The sounds of piano playing drifted up from the saloon. You're just in time, she said as she placed the cake on top of the refrigerator to cool. We decided this place needed a little Christmas spirit. Abby and Hannah are downstairs with some hot cider and fudge. We thought we'd do some singing and maybe string some popcorn for the Christmas tree. How about it? Sounds great, Nancy said. The girls followed Rose downstairs, mugs of hot cider in hand. Everyone gathered around the piano as Abby began to play. At Bess's request, they started off by singing the song from The Bandit's Treasure. As Nancy looked for a place to set down her cider mug, she spotted Charlie's toolkit in the corner. Instantly, she thought of the filed-through chandelier chain. Does Charlie have a metal file? She asked as they paused between songs. The edge of my jacket zipper is jagged. I'd like to file it down. I know he does, Rose said. I can't read. She turned to Abby. Abby, didn't you borrow Charlie's file to fix that broken utensil drawer in the kitchen? Yes, but I couldn't fix it, so I put the file back in his toolkit, Abby said, looking up from the piano. Nancy bent down to search Charlie's toolkit. I don't see a metal file here, she reported. That's odd, Rose said. Charlie's very particular about keeping his tools together. How did you meet Charlie, by the way? Nancy asked casually as she returned to the piano. Through Lewis, Rose replied. Charlie has worked for some of Lewis's clients before. Why do you ask, Nancy? Just curious, Nancy answered. Then looking up, she noticed Abby watching her closely. Nancy smiled brightly. Another song, Abby. Abby abruptly turned back to the keyboard. Nancy joined the others in singing holiday songs, but she couldn't help feeling uneasy. Later that night, after the girls went to bed, Nancy lay awake, pondering the mansion's chain of accidents. She could hear Bess and George breathing deeply. Closing her eyes, she willed herself to forget the mystery and relax. Suddenly, a loud clatter came from downstairs. Nancy's eyes popped open. George and Bess sat bolt upright, awakened by the noise. Scrambling out of bed and grabbing their robes, the girls raced downstairs. Nancy went into the kitchen first, turning on the light. Beside the refrigerator, a kitchen chair lay tipped over on its side. George righted the chair while Nancy and Bess looked around the room. Hey, George said in surprise. Nancy and Bess turned around. George was standing on the chair picking up the cake that Rose had put on the refrigerator to cool. As George stepped down, Nancy could see that a large piece of cake was missing. On the cake plate, coated with crumbs, lay a metal file. Nancy stepped over and picked up the file. This is probably what was used to cut the chandelier chain, she said. What do you want to bet this is Charlie's missing file? But how did it get here? George asked. Abby was using it in the kitchen to fix a drawer, Nancy said, but she says she put it back in the toolkit. Maybe she was sneaking a piece of cake, Bess suggested tentatively. Why would she use a metal file for that? George asked skeptically. Let's look around, Nancy suggested. The girls wandered through the kitchen and pantry, making sure all the windows and doors were locked. Then they stepped into the dining room. Suddenly, Nancy pulled up short. The curtains around the jib door fluttered in the night wind. The jib door was open. Oh, you're going to listen to my soothing voice? Terror is a mind reader. Exquisite. It was exquisite. California stream. That's when he streams. Thank you for that, host Timo. Okay, so I figured out why I've said Rob in the place of Rose twice in this book. When the word Rose is like very close in like line to Bess, it's like my brain like combines the... Oh, hi Semi, thank you for the host. It's like my brain takes the word Rose and the word Bess, and it comes out Rob in my brain. Oh, thank you for that, host Summer. I know that feeling. I do read streams despite the handicap of being incapable of reading. I hear you. I was having troubles. Runs into the door comically. Okay, or comedically. I got you. Hey. Let me respond to my best friend real quick. Alright, one more chapter. Wow, look, it's twins. Alright guys, how you doing? How we doing? One more chapter until end of stream. And it's only like 9 pages. Alright, here we go. Chapter 10. Secret Words Remembered. Nancy rushed through the open jib door into the backyard. She squinted in the darkness but saw no one. Except for the noise of distant car traffic, all she could hear was the muffled sound of a dog barking. Then her eye caught sight of something on the dirt path that cut through the garden. Her heart leapt. It was Abby's long-fringed purple scarf. She picked it up and went back inside. "Abby's scarf!" Bess exclaimed as Nancy stepped through the door. So it was Abby trying to steal a piece of cake. "If that's all it is, then why did she run out through the gym door?" George said. "She's embarrassed about her weight," Bess put in. "I know how that feels. Abby just doesn't want to be caught eating something fattening like cake." "Girls!" Rose's voice rang through the kitchen. "Is that you?" "We're in the dining room," Nancy called. Rose entered, followed by Hannah and Abby. Hannah and Rose were still in their bathrobes, but Abby was still in her clothes. "I heard a noise," Rose said. "I met Hannah and Abby in the hall. They heard it too." "Why is the gym door open?" "We may have had an intruder," Nancy told Rose. "A hungry intruder. I'll show you." Nancy led the group back to the kitchen. She pointed to the cake plate now sitting on the kitchen table. Hannah stared at the cake with the metal file lying across the plate. "Someone broke in to steal a piece of cake?" she said in disbelief. "Why would someone cut the cake with a file?" Rose asked. Nancy pointed at the empty space where the drawer of kitchen utensils usually was. "Maybe the file was the only utensil in sight," she suggested. "That looks like Charlie's file," Abby said, frowning. "Why was it in the kitchen? I'm positive I returned it to his toolkit." Nancy nodded at Bess, who handed the purple scarf to Abby. "My scarf!" Abby exclaimed. Then she blushed sheepishly. "Oh, now I remember. I felt better, so I decided to varnish the table tonight, and I opened the gym door to get some fresh air. I went out to the yard for a minute. I bet that's where I dropped my scarf. I guess I forgot to close the door when we all went to the saloon. I'm so sorry." From the corner of her eye, Nancy could see Bess and George look at her. Abby's reaction seemed genuine. Maybe this was simply a case of an intruder coming in through the open gym door. But why would an intruder steal only a piece of cake? "It's all right," Rose told Abby wearily, "but please be careful next time." She turned to Nancy. "Was anything else taken?" "I don't think so," Nancy said. "The thief probably ran when the chair tipped over, afraid that the noise would wake us up." Rose sighed. "Thank goodness. Why don't we just all get to bed?" "Good idea," Nancy said. She and George closed the gym door, and the whole group headed back upstairs. On the way up, Nancy turned to Rose. "By the way, Rose, I forgot to tell you," she said. "George went running with Mary Lee this afternoon, and she said she'd give us a tour of Chinatown tomorrow. If we start working early in the morning, could we take off at 2? "Of course, Nancy," Rose said. "I have to get up early, too," Abby said. "I have to take my car in for a tune-up." Good, Nancy thought. This would be their chance to search Abby's room. The next morning, the girls were pulling on their old jeans when they heard the front door slam. Nancy looked out the window to see Abby get into her little green car. "Let's go," she said. Outside Abby's room, Nancy asked Bess to keep watch. "Abby shouldn't come back, but if she does, sneeze," she directed Bess. "Sneeze loudly, so we could hear." "Will do," Bess agreed. Nancy and George stole into the room, shutting the door behind them. They began to search the room systematically. "No sign of Lizzie's papers," Nancy said after a while. "But I found this on her nightstand." She held out a magazine called Magic. "I saw something like that, too." George went to Abby's bureau, retrieving a flyer advertising Silken Wonders Magic Studio. "So Abby's into magic," Nancy mused. "Doesn't surprise me," George commented. "She's always yakking about spirits and auras." Nancy bent down to look under Abby's dressing table. She spied a small metal cylinder with a label that said compressed air. Behind the cylinder lay something that looked like a belt. Picking it up, she realized it was some kind of shoulder harness made of black fabric straps. She looked back and forth from the cylinder to the harness. What could Abby be using this equipment for? Nancy stood up. George was sniffing Abby's perfumes on the dressing table. She smiled and handed one bottle to Nancy. Nancy inhaled the fragrance. "Good work, George," she said. "Gardenia, the same fragrance as was on the note left on our pillowcase." Just then, Bess sneezed loudly. "Abby's back," George whispered. "Quick, hide in the closet," Nancy said. She and George raced across the room until Bess popped her head in. "Sorry, false alarm," she confessed. "I couldn't help it. I really actually had to sneeze." Nancy giggled. "That's okay. We're done anyway," she said. "Let's go get some breakfast." Mary was waiting for the girls at the bus stop near Portsmouth Square. "Hi, welcome to Chinatown," she called out when she spotted them. "Thanks for showing us around, Mary," Nancy said as she hopped off the bus. "Don't mention it," Mary said. "After we walk around, my grandfather wants you to come to our restaurant for a meal. He has some pictures of my great-grandfather he thought you'd like to see." "We'd love to," Bess said enthusiastically. Mary and the girls walked through Portsmouth Square with its clusters of men playing chess and cards. "If you come early in the morning, you'll see people performing Tai Chi here," Mary said. "What's that clicking sound?" Nancy asked. "The sound of mahjong tiles," Mary replied. "Mahjong's a very popular Chinese game. You can hear that sound all over Chinatown." Their first stop was a ginseng store, where women sat behind the counter sorting odd-shaped roots. The girls tried cups of ginseng tea. "Ugh," Bess made a face as she sipped. "It's good for you, Bess," Nancy teased. Mary nodded. "Ginseng is supposed to help you live longer and be healthier," she explained. Bess sighed. "Of course, if it tastes bad, it has to be good for you," she complained. Mary laughed. The girls followed Mary through the crowded streets and alleyways of Chinatown. Roasted ducks hung in the windows of the many food stores, and fruit and vegetables lay in crates outside. Everyone around them was speaking rapidly in Chinese. As they walked down Grant Avenue, George craned her neck up. "All these buildings look like pagodas," she remarked. "See their curved roofs? I bet they're all painted red and green." "After the 1906 earthquake," Mary explained, "the buildings here were all rebuilt in this style. It made the new immigrants feel at home." "And the lamp posts look like Chinese lanterns," Bess added. "Totally cool." Next, Mary took them to a fortune cookie factory. There they watched in fascination as a machine poured cookie batter into tiny circular pools on a revolving griddle. The workers picked up each soft cookie from the turning griddle, placed a fortune inside, and sealed the cookie, bending it into the familiar curved shape. When the girls returned to the street, they were all munching fortune cookies. Nancy read her fortune aloud. "Dark clouds will part and the answers will come." "The rainbow follows the rain," read Bess. George read hers. "Trust yourself, not a fortune cookie." The girls laughed at that one. "My turn," said Mary. "Many new friends will enter your life." She smiled. "They already have." She checked her watch. "Let's head over to see my grandfather." Back on Grant Avenue, Mary led them up a stairway to the restaurant. A sign over the door read Phoenix Garden Restaurant. The phoenix symbol was certainly showing up a lot in this case, Nancy thought to herself. The mantel at the Lee's other restaurant, the tower ornament on the mansion, the mirror in the saloon, and the song from the Bandit's Treasure mentioned a phoenix too. Inside the restaurant, Mary's uncle and grandfather greeted them warmly. They all sat down at a window table and enjoyed some delicious chicken and broccoli with garlic sauce. When everyone had finished, Mary's grandfather rose and left the table, returning with a lacquer box. "My father," he said, like many Chinese, came to California to find gold. He took a stack of photos and papers from the box. California was called Gum San, land of the Golden Mountain. But like many others, my father did not find riches in the gold country, only prejudice against the Chinese miners. So he came to San Francisco and worked at Lizzie's hotel," Mr. Lee went on. "He sent the money he earned home to his family." "Your mother stayed in China?" Nancy asked. Mr. Lee nodded. "My mother could not join him because of the immigration laws at the time," he explained. "My parents were separated for 20 years. Bess gasped. "That's pretty awful." Mr. Lee showed them a photograph of his father panning for gold and another of his father and mother. "This is one of my favorites," he said, passing the photograph to Nancy. It showed Mary's great-grandfather standing with Lizzie Applegate in front of an ornate carved mantel. "Was this taken at the hotel?" Nancy asked. "Yes," Mr. Lee said. "But this looks like the mantel in your other restaurant on California Street," Nancy said. "That mantel was originally at the hotel," Mr. Lee explained. "Lizzie gave that to my father when she died." "I'd love to have a copy of this picture," Bess said. "I'm making a display for the hotel. This picture would be the perfect centerpiece." Mr. Lee promised Bess he would have a copy of the old photograph made for her right away. Nancy, George, and Bess thanked Mary and her grandparents for their wonderful day in Chinatown. As the girls stood up to leave, Mary's grandfather spoke to her in Chinese. Mary looked surprised. "What is it?" Nancy asked. "My grandfather remembered something else about Lizzie's hotel," Mary said. "Once, late at night when he was a little boy, he heard his father talking with his mother. His father called the hotel Gumbo Fu." "What does that mean?" Bess asked. Mary's eyes sparkled. "Gumbo Fu," she translated, means gold treasure mansion. Ooh, that's a great place to end. That was the end of chapter 10. 9 pages for chapter 10 is pretty confusing. Hi, Smokey. Cake's fattening? Nah, it ain't. Yeah, all of those yellowbacks are these are the classic series of Nancy Drew books. Yeah, the best books of all time, yeah. Yeah, Jibdor, you spelled it right, J-I-B. It's like a it's hard to explain because they don't make them really anymore, but like in older homes, especially like those Victorian style mansions like take place in this book, sometimes like in the kitchen or the dining room, like toward the back of the house, one of the walls was actually like a door, but you couldn't tell. So like when it was closed, it just looked like seamless wall panels, but there's like a way that you can pull it. So it's almost like a garage door in a way, and it's like a panel of the wall literally will either slide up or like come out like this. And it was an easy way to get like furniture in the house, especially because a lot of times those front doors would be small, so it was just like an easy way to get furniture in the house. So the jib door could like prop open like that, or it would slide up kind of like a garage door is the best way that I can explain it. The fortune cookie factory visiting scene, truly iconic in the indie series, I imagine, based on nothing. Yeah, eat that cake. Yeah, camouflage door. That's a good way to say it. Okay. Alright. Well, that was fun. I hope you guys had fun. It's only 4 o'clock. I don't have to be anywhere until... Oh, I have a voicemail. Excuse me 1 second. Alright, I need to call this person back. I will be back shortly with a short Shattered Medallion stream. So hopefully I'll see you back again. Thank you all for being here, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!